This talk is part of the public program for the exhibition Homecoming by Swoon, or our Caledonian Curry. And this exhibition and all the additional programs and public programs like this was made happen by SAC Gallery in collaboration with Turner Carroll Gallery. We also have our sponsors, which is 100 Thomson Foundation and Thai Bev. And also we have a partner in Chiang Mai, which is our SAC residency program, and Hello Print Friends. So well, it takes many people together to collaborate to bring our superstar here. So I'm giving you Swoon or Kelly.
Thank you so much. Hey guys, thank you for coming on your Saturday. Hopefully we'll just have like a nice air-conditioned chill vibe here. So I have kind of a whole arc of things I'll just try to like blaze through, but I think this is a nice intimate group, so if I'm not making sense or if I'm going on too long, just, you know, raise your hand. What? Yeah, so this has been, you know, I'm here it's my first time doing a show here, but I visited here in 2007, and while we were working on this show, I was kind of realizing, you know, like looking at this piece, for example, that there's a lot of kind of imagery kind of deep within my body of work that was really super inspired by everything from like the Thai mangroves to like the shapes of, you know, the like informal architecture to kind of temple structures and pattern making. So it's like those things where like, you know, something just kind of seeps into your consciousness. And so there's a couple of things. So this is actually a raft that I'll tell you guys a little bit more about. But if you look at like the kind of shapes at the bottom, it's sort of like the mangroves, and it leads up into the village structures, and it's very related to that drawing on the back wall. So there's quite a few things kind of throughout my practice that are sort of deeply influenced by Thai art and architecture and culture. And how I started was as a street artist. I feel like that's how some folks here kind of originally know my work. And that was, you know, I was like just a kid from Daytona Beach, Florida. Like I grew up out on a dirt road, and I was like raised in a really kind of wild situation. But there was always like a little bit of kind of love of culture and art. And I found a way to like a retirees painting class. Who's brought this up? So I was like, in Florida, it's a lot of people go to retire and paint. So I ended up in this painting class and just decided, okay, this is it. This is me. I'm an artist. But then when I got to New York, I realized that, you know, being this kid from the end of the dirt road, like, that I wanted to kind of still feel this like sense that art is like for people. It has a way that it's like a little bit lively, a little bit raw, a little bit like in your life in some way. And that's a thread that has kind of carried through my work forever, even when the projects have changed. So, you know, these pieces are paste-ups out on the street. You can see them kind of rotting away and decaying and sort of becoming part of the wall, which is also something I loved. I love that kind of organic process. And you know, even, okay, here she is on the street. This is the girl from Run Home. And I'm laughing because I had the name wrong for a while. But anyway, this is a piece that I was traveling through. And also this in the center is the ghost tower, which I didn't realize until Alex mentioned it. That it was like this building in Bangkok that I got a bit fixated on. But I didn't realize that in fact the whole city is a bit fixated on it. So I drew it, and then years later bringing it back and having people identify that was quite interesting. But yeah, so this was a project that sort of spanned almost 20 years of my life of creating these large-scale block print portraits and pasting them out on cities all over the world and really building a community. Like I think some of the folks who are here today are folks that I kind of know through that community. So street art has been one of the most remarkable kind of community building art forms that I've ever known. And I think with that spirit, I kind of continued to do other forms of work and always a little bit looking for that sense of like people working together. You know, this is like and the street art kind of went through all the different projects that I then went on to create. And each of the pieces that are in the show, I've kind of included images of them, you know, out on the street. And this is one that I love in particular because a friend sent this to me, and I think this guy's name was Julius, and she said, "Why do you always sit next to this piece?" And he said that I set my chair up next to her because, like, she makes me feel calm. And I just love that way that, like, when you put things out in the world, you never really know, like, who it's going to matter to or, like, how it's going to, you know, interact with people's lives. And this is from my dad, because, you know, my dad had always dreamed to come to Thailand, and he sent me in 2007 because he felt that he was too old to make such a long trip, and he was like, "You go for me." And so, you know, the kind of love of Thailand was something that I inherited from my dad, and so he has since passed away, but I feel like, you know, he really stoked. And so, you know, as a kid, like, working out on the street, I also found, like, as I was working, that I started to have these other ideas, and that I wanted to, you know, make them happen. And I think this is actually, I'm looking at you as a teacher. So this is, like, next to my stove. Okay, we won't talk about the fire hazard, but what I want to say is that I was starting to have these ideas, like, oh, I want to make an installation, I want to make da-da-da. But I didn't have spaces, I didn't have invitations, like, nothing like that. But what I did have was, like, every square inch of my apartment. And I just feel like when people, you know, ask me those kind of questions about, like, how do I get started, this is hung in front of my windows, you know, and, like, as I was doing this, I was, like, kind of hanging, you know, I was sitting at my whole apartment, I was hanging these things, and I was going, I think that I have another language behind this one that's trying to come through. And then right around that time, somebody said, "Hey, would you ever do an installation?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm actually practicing them right now." And so I brought out this piece, and this was actually in Manchester. Was my first installation. And then I worked with a gallery in New York. I don't know if you guys are familiar with New York art world, but there's this character. His name is Jeffrey Deitch, and he's just this, like, long-standing kind of gallerist who, like, really changes a lot of people's lives. And he did so for me, and he gave me this kind of temporary studio within which to build this huge installation. And it was this opportunity to just take all these ideas that were just sitting in my head and actually, you know, pop the genie out of the bottle for the first time. It was absolutely, you know, just life-changing. And then I went on to kind of, you know, to take this body of work in many different ways. This was a collaboration with some friends at college. That's another really good thing that I love to talk to students about, is work with your friends, get together with your friends, and make things together. This was actually a portrait that was in memorial, thinking about the border between the U.S. and Mexico and the violence that happens there as a result of the border. So as I was working, I also started to find that there were these opportunities to kind of look deeper and to create kind of deeper narratives within the work, and then when sharing that, to be able to sort of create spaces to discuss those issues. And you know, and then also just to get into these really deep kind of formal explorations, which is, you know, something that I've found throughout my life is that I want to go really, really deep formally, and then I come back out and want to work socially. But so this was my second installation with Jeffrey Deitch, the person who I was talking about in New York. And this was this huge space where we did actually the rafts project. These rafts that came down the river and meant the installation. And it was kind of this installation that was built on, like, an imaginary floodline, because I was thinking at the time about kind of rising seas and climate change, and kind of, you know, imagining that sense of, like, how we need to be thinking about our coastal world, while also being really influenced by Thailand. So you kind of look at that model temple in the back, or some of the patterns that are hanging within the dresses of these women. You know, it's very much like myself in the moment of just having come home from makeup. You know, and then I went on to create different portraits that this one is called Talasa. She's the primordial incarnation of the sea. And, you know, thinking about our human relationship to water. And then this one is a version of that, which is, it's actually called the Ice Queen. A lot of people think it's Native American because it looks like a headdress, but it's actually a portrait where I started to begin to think about my family. And in my family, my parents, or my mom used to, her brothers and sisters used to call my grandmother the Ice Queen, which actually like was not very, it was like, it kind of referred to like a deep coldness within her. And I just started, it was at this moment that I wanted to sort of draw the tenderness of that, but I was starting to think about kind of what was it in my family that had driven so many of the things that had influenced my childhood. And around this time, my mom passed away, and this is a portrait that I made of her in her death process, because I also found that like once you have a creative practice, like it becomes like this pole that you can hold on to in any weather. And so there was just so many moments in my life when I realized that like just making through it was going to kind of keep me sane. This is a show called Submerged Fatherlands that I created shortly after the passing of my mom. And it's in the Brooklyn Museum. This tree is like 6 stories tall. It was really an epic project. And we brought back the rafts, and we brought in these huge sculptures. And it was, you know, it was for me very much, you know, when I made that first installation I was showing the climate line, nobody would like engage me on that. And then this was like 5, 6 years later, and New York had flooded. And suddenly everyone wanted to talk about it. And I was like, okay. And so we kind of brought the rafts like into the building. And we sort of started this conversation, and I had just lost my mom. And so it was that kind of beautiful way that art has, where you can talk about personal grief and collective grief at the same time. And you don't have, it doesn't have to be perfectly cut and dry and logical. It just has to like connect with us in an emotional capacity, and it starts to sort of form meaning, you know? And so that was very much happening with the creation of this installation. And I also at this time started to think about creating spaces that felt like temples and felt like spaces of safety or wonder, and you know, spaces of joy or celebration or grief. There's so many ways that kind of creating a space and using color and texture and then inviting people into that space, they can sort of function in so many different ways. So creating these kind of tapestry installations became a big part of my work. And I also started to dig like pretty deeply into the sort of traumatic roots of my family history. So I grew up at the end of the Sturt Road. There was a ton of addiction and mental illness in my family. And what I kind of came to understand was that nobody is like deep, like life-ruiningly into an addiction without some kind of traumatic history. That nobody's just choosing that. Nobody's like, hey, I'll just ruin my life today for literally no reason other than I'm a bad person. Which was the narrative that I grew up with. That was like what Fox News America wanted us to believe. And so, for example, when I created this piece, I won't try to unpack the whole thing today, but if anybody's interested in it, I have a talk online called Unearthing the Magia. And I get into this process whereby I did a lot of psychedelic assisted therapy. I did all different kinds of work around my kind of family history. And as I was doing it, like every step of the way, I was drawing and creating and sort of letting dreams and visions and other things that informed the piece. And it ended up to be, for me, one of the most emotionally impactful pieces I've ever made. It really felt like it was part of my kind of, you know, just part of my healing process, part of my like coming to consciousness, and I was able to share it with people, which was such a special thing. And now I'm going to take us back in time a little bit to a project that I did on the water. So this right here is me and some friends, and we're making plans to live on a bunch of rafts. And we sailed on Test Fit and bathtub and worked, so we were like, this will be fine. So I, you know, again, kid from the end of the dirt road. I moved to New York City. It's very fancy out there, and we love it. And I love being in like beautiful, elegant gallery spaces. We hear here today, like this is great. I love this. But I also felt like there's still more to it. That there's like that kid that I was when I was 16, and some little piece of culture would come through my life and just totally rock my world. I was like, I still want to go talk to her. And so, a bunch of friends created these jump rafts. And it was like 110 feet of jump raft made out of all recycled materials. And we strung them together, and we basically became a floating circus. And we went down the Mississippi River from Minneapolis to St. Louis over the course of 2 summers. And we were taught by, I'll just show you that, the guy in the blue shirt at the front, his name is Papa Neutrino. Also, if anyone needs summer reading, I think it's called The Happiest Man Alive. It's about Papa Neutrino. He was this absolute, like, wild human being who, he actually built a jug raft that went transatlantic from New York to Ireland. I did not do that, so I'm going to show you some rafts that end up in Europe. We'll put those in shipping containers. But anyway, that was the person who taught us. So we kind of knew what was possible, like via the unbridled imagination of this very interesting person. So, after the second year of the rafts on the Mississippi, they actually got burned down, which, to be honest, was a blessing because the waters were about to get really dangerous. But I still had like some raft spirit in my bones, and so I got together with a group of friends, and we put together another series of rafts that came down the Hudson River, back up the East River and into New York City, which was, a very different trip, but also so wonderful. Like the Mississippi is like so folksy and so down home, and everybody would like cook us giant meals and invite us into their homes and just be so like, where are your parents? And do they know you're doing this? What is this? And New Yorkers were like a little bit column A, a little bit column B. Like definitely call the cops. I mean, everybody always called the cops, no matter what time. We were like, the cops are on one line, and then like make spaghetti for them is like on the other line. You know what I mean? So it was an amazing adventure, and it taught me so much about just this theme that I was talking about kind of bringing art to people where they are. That like when you show up in people's lives and you're this weird, unlikely, what even is going on here thing, that it kind of like gets at something like, it gets under like what we think we know, and it kind of taps into like a little bit of a sense of wonder and kind of innocence. People would always come up to us and go, I've always wanted to do this, I dreamed of doing this my whole life, and because I think, we all have, there's these kinds of adventures that are sort of in our DNA, I think, and I do feel like building rafts with your friends is one of them. And so in this one, to explain where we are here, we're in the Adriatic Sea. So first we were in New York, and then we packed them up into a shipping container, and we went to Koper, Slovenia, and we rebuilt some things and figured it out. And amazingly, so European boating law is like very, very strict. American boating law is much more Wild West. And if you registered your boats in one place and you bring them to another, they still have to respect the, they didn't want to, but they did. They still have to respect the boating laws of the country that you come from. So since we were registered in the States, where you can just be like, I have a wooden boat, and that's all you tell them, they sort of had to let us have fun and go around Venice and have this kind of amazing magical adventure. And this was one of the most, I sort of still am in withdrawals from like the magic of this time period. But one thing, while this was happening, it was like we were like moving mountains. We were not taking no for an answer. We were overcoming amazing challenges to do this thing. It was essentially a kind of like a wild lark. It was just about joy and wonder and play, which is awesome. But I also started to ask myself, I was like, we can do these things that people say we can't do. And like, is there any way that we could kind of use this skill set in a situation of need, in a situation of crisis? And so right at that time, which was 2010, this really heavy earthquake hit Haiti. It was utterly devastating because, building laws and all kinds of stuff there. And, me being from Florida, Haiti is like our neighbors, basically. So it's like this awful thing has just happened to your neighbors, and like you're kind of primed to be able to solve some problems. And so I got together with a group of friends, and we connected with a village, who was actually a village of artists and farmers. So we really had quite a connected sensibility with them. And we set to work on a project building super adobe domes, which, it's actually interesting. The super adobe domes in Los Angeles also survived the fire. So this is a system that started by an architect named Leonard Khalili, but he made it open source because he really wanted to be like a humanitarian architect. So we worked with some architects and some engineers to make sure we were doing everything right, and artists, and we got together. And over the course of a few years, we built a community center, which is this structure right here. And then we also built 2 homes with super adobe and then a home with bamboo, working together with this village. And we kind of worked under the premise that, like, even in a time of crisis, like, that thinking about beauty and thinking about color and thinking about kind of having spaces that feel joyful, that it actually still matters and it can still be something that can enrich people's lives. And so we did a lot of collaborating with the local artisans, which, you'll see here on the walls. I did some work with metalworkers and woodworkers here in Chiang Mai, and my first time doing that was in Haiti, was sort of realizing what it was like to collaborate with people who have this, like, very, very ancient and very well-honed skill set. So here's one of the old houses that we took down and worked with bamboo. And so one of the things that we did on this particular project was kind of the premise that artists, we have all this kind of rabble-rousy, get-together energy, and that we also often can find new ways of seeing things, because that's sort of our job, is to kind of come at problems from new angles. And so we just felt that, like, this collaboration between architects and earth builders and locals in the community, that we could sort of have an opportunity to take some of these very old building styles that had fallen out of fashion and start to bring them back into people's lives, because the reason that the earthquake had been so devastating was because people switched to modern building materials without having access to the right stuff, because Haiti is an island. So, sorry, I'm giving you guys a lot of information, but all this to say, when artists and people get together, that, like, the feeling of building things together after a crisis is itself part of the healing, I would say. And this is another little project. I'm just going to kind of breeze through this one that I worked on in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, where a friend said, "Hey, do you want to rebuild this? You want to build a sculpture on this house before it comes down?" And I proposed this idea of, like, musical architecture and kind of building, like, instrumentation into the houses. And then it ended up being something that I was just a very small part of. And in fact, like, it still exists. It's like a permanent thing in New Orleans, the Music Box Village, if anyone's in that area. And it's this kind of musical playground that has the instrumentation built into the structures. And it's all about collaboration between artists, musicians, and, builders, and who kind of, like, constantly work together to, like, imagine how this kind of play and wonder space with, like, sound and structures can come together. How's everybody doing? Are we good? I'm kind of on a marathon. Is this still making sense?
Hi. A few more people just arrived.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us. Okay, so this project is, so like I said, there was a lot of addiction and mental illness in my family, and it was one of those things where when I was, like, in my 20s, I was like, bye, and I just, like, left as fast as I could, and I went to college, and I just tried to leave it behind and forget it. And then as I got a little older, it was like, I just started to, like, my life started to, like, fall apart in ways that I kind of came to understand were related to having unresolved issues. And so while I started to kind of dive into my own work and my own understanding of the relationship between trauma and addiction, I realized, as with everything, like, when I'm thinking through something, I always want to make art at the same time. It's like, it's how I think, And so this group called Philly Mural Arts in Philadelphia, who does amazing work with muralists and community groups, they asked me, like, is there anything that is really an important issue for you and would love to connect you with our community? And so I talked about, opiate addiction. My parents had been opiate addicts, and we were having a horrific opiate crisis in Philadelphia. And so they had opened a storefront where people could come, and do little kind of art activities, could kind of feel safe, feel respected. These are people who are living homeless, who are addicted to drugs, who are really struggling. And so I did a series of collaborations with them over the years where we tried to kind of create events within the spaces. Like, here we're giving manicures to folks who are living homeless, because not only as, like, a caring gesture, but also, like, sometimes when you're outside, it's just hard to keep clean. And so kind of, the importance of these kinds of spaces in that area is that when people are really desperate, they're not always just going to go straight to rehab. Sometimes they need to just, like, sit down and have a cup of tea before they even think about the kind of next step in their lives. And so I, as somebody whose parents have been opiate addicts, I honestly don't even know, like, when I think about whether my mom was living on the street, the truth is I don't even know, because she was disappeared for periods of my childhood. And so it made a lot of sense for me to go directly into this neighborhood and to work with folks that were at the front lines of trying to help out in this crisis. And so, there are people, social workers, doctors, there's so many people who are involved in this issue, but in the US, in a lot of ways we still don't really understand. We still have that conservative mindset of like, if you just made better choices, this would be different. And so I also hosted some events where we had people, this is a woman named Sonia who was in the rehab. We worked with her through arts therapy, and we also had her tell her story publicly, just in that way, like if you can really get to the heart of like people who are affected and actually like regard them as a human being with their own life, that there is a way that we can start to understand how deep these issues run and find ways to help people that are more effective. Does anybody recognize this guy, or do you know Gabor Mate? Has anyone heard that name? So this is a doctor who wrote a book that totally changed my life. It was called In the Realm of the Hungry Ghost, and so one of my dreams was to work with him and to bring him to the people who Department of Behavioral Health there and have him share his ideas with folks who are at the front lines of addiction in Philadelphia. And so, this project is one of those things where you take art, you take community building, you take events, you take kind of murals and talks and all these different kind of things, and you try to make a space where you're sharing, the academic stuff, the legal stuff, the creative stuff, the like crisis response stuff, where it kind of all can come together in the same room and have different kinds of minds working on the same problem. Does that make sense? And so that's a project. I'm actually going to do another project like this soon in Boston, which I'm excited about. And so this is a project called The Sanctuary. So many years ago, I was invited to a town called Broward, Pennsylvania that was losing a ton of its buildings. It was basically an economic freefall, this whole area of the country. And all of these old structures were getting knocked down, and the mayor said, hey, like, is there a way you can help us? And they were like, you guys are artists, you're always doing crazy stuff. And very naively, I said yes. And I bought this building, and then proceeded to, for the next 15 years, chip away at all these different kind of creative ways to, take apart parts of the building, working with my craft crew, all different, bringing people together, working with the after school programs, to figure out if we could kind of, rehabilitate this building in a way that would also employ people in the community, and a way that would also engage, the kids and folks that were coming out of, the folks that were coming out of the youth program but weren't ready for jobs yet, all different kinds of people. So to see how we could get people involved in the creation of crafts and tiles we were hoping to tile the building with, and just figure out, can we kind of slowly, collectively fix this space? And I eventually realized that it was a little beyond me, and that I really needed to actually turn the building over to somebody who could take it to the next phase. And so I met this woman, Rana, and so this is kind of important for two reasons. The fact that I didn't meet her till 15 years later, and the reason I feel like the project kind of had to go this way is like when I first took over the building, I was totally repressing my family's history of trauma. I had no dialogue about that. And I also didn't realize that my own family, the Currys in Florida, are actually directly involved in enslaving people in the U.S. So I'm sure everyone here probably knows about the U.S. history of enslavement. And some people, I'm one of them, think that history set off cycles of intergenerational trauma that continue to this day, and that there's systems of racist oppression that continue to this day. And so when I learned this about my family, I was like, oh shit, I need to find a way to actively participate in the idea that we can actually create repair. Like if we have created damage, we can create repair. And so, Rana is a formerly incarcerated person. She was also an addict in recovery. And so when we met, I was like, holy shit, like everything that you're thinking about in terms of addiction and working with trauma, like I'm finally able at this point to understand how important this is. And additionally, I'm at a moment where I'm ready to start to open the discussion about reparations. And so she's a leader in the Black community, and I realized that if I could decide to sort of put property into the hands of the Black community, work with somebody who was working to stop cycles of intergenerational trauma, and have a public discussion about it. Be like, hey, I'm a white person from any white person in the U.S. is sort of involved in this history, but some people sort of even more specifically than others. And so I sort of made it a little bit of a rallying cry. I was like, if you have this family history and you want to somehow be involved in this, please help me fix this church up, and we're gonna give it to this woman, and she's gonna make it. So I actually donated her a house and a church, and she started. The first one is a house for women coming out of prison, and then here we are fixing the roof of the church because we rallied some collectors together, and then we were able to also fix the roof and the windows of the church and donate it to her, and it just finally transferred to her on Chinese New Year, on Lunar New Year. We were like, woo! And so she's fixing it up, and she's going to make housing for families who are coming out of incarceration. Because the U.S. incarcerates more people than any country in the world, and so much of it is that we are about punishment, not about healing. And so this position is saying, look, like punishment is making it worse. Like, what if we actually try to address some of the problems that are getting people into these situations? So here we are decided. That was the day we transferred the church, or the house. And so, as you might imagine, doing all of these really heavy, really intense community-based projects, I was tired. I was really tired. And I actually lost both of my parents like pretty close together around 2017. And or a little bit before that, I just needed a break. I just in the most kind of real way, I needed a break. And the thing that refills my well when I'm out in the world doing too much is just to retreat and just make something that's only about art and only about color and texture and play, And so I started working on the stop motion animation. I don't know if anyone has seen the film Cicada that's been playing on the wall, but Cicada was my answer to just utter soul depletion. And so I just started working with these images that were coming basically out of my unconscious, and letting one image lead to the next image, and playing with cardboard and fabric and soft materials, and just sort of really letting the creative process be the guide. And it was so healing and restorative for me as somebody who had just been out in the world giving so much. It was my own creative process became the thing that gave back to me. So yeah, if anyone hasn't seen Cicada, here's a shot of me making that cover image, and we'll probably play it after. Okay, so this is the last project, and then we can ask some questions. And I'm looking at you on this one because we had a conversation about kids. So pretty recently, once I started making the film, I had this deep inner pivot creatively, where almost by surprise, I just started writing in this way that I was almost who's doing this writing? What's even happening? I really sort of was kind of taken over by this kind of need to write these stories and kind of by the stories themselves. And the first one was I was doing therapy around an event from my childhood. So I said that my parents were in a lot of addiction. My mom also had a psychotic breakdown when I was 7. And it was this moment that was so terrifying. I actually kind of believed in my child mind that she was going to kill us, and she thought aliens were coming. It was a nightmare. My dad rescued us. Everybody was fine. She got to the hospital. She recovered. She came back. But still many years later, I realized that event was still affecting me. And so I started to do some therapy around it. And then one night after a big therapy session, because we brought a bunch of material, I couldn't sleep. And I didn't want to get out of bed. And so I started to say, 2 little girls were living in a house, and they were being raised by a wicked witch. And I was just telling about the girls and the sisters on this adventure. And their mother, they have this kind of wicked witch for a mother, and they have an aunt who's a paper doll. And I started to just kind of share the stories of my family kind of back with myself in the form of a fairy tale. And I found that we all have an inner child, and it turns out we you can't just read philosophy to her. Like, she only speaks certain languages, or he, and like with mine, she's like, you better get down low and talk to me about like princesses and magical caravans in the woods and ogres. Like, if you want to talk to me, you know? And so this tale started to unfold, and it's called The Swoon Sisters. And it's essentially a retelling of this moment in my life where my mom was having this breakdown, and I was sort of trying to, you know, survive it and understand it. And this is the kind of cast of characters as they're developing that is involved in it. Let's see if we can. And I'm starting to think about, you know, how it's going to come into being, you know, as an animation, or as a novella, or even, you know, I'm even thinking about it, maybe it's a video game. Like, I'm really in this like very open space about what this thing becomes. I worked with the Sundance Ray, the Directors Lab in the States to sort of develop the story, which was incredible. And I would ultimately like to make it a film, but it's a really big hill, so I'm working on it. And if anyone, I also made an oracle deck out of the, so if anyone wants to get their card drawn, come see me later. And so we did, one of the ways that I'm practicing, kind of one of the languages I'm practicing that might be one of the languages we tell the story in is stop motion animation. And so that's kind of, you can see how we made this next scene. It takes like an entire day to work with these like full-scale stop motion puppets. But I really love this sense of, I'm calling it like Southern magical realism, because it's this very like kind of Florida, like dreamy, swampy, you know, kind of world that is very much the world of like the child's imagination. You know, and the function of fairy tales. So many fairy tales tell really fucking dark stories. And so that's it. So, so yeah, that's a lot. Does anybody have any questions? Oh.
I was going to try and figure out what they were. Hold on. Just starting off, I think you've got 3 arts, which is on the front row. I guess my first question would be, what, if you were to say like 5 pieces of advice for growing artists and students, what would they be?
5 pieces of advice?
As many as you want, really.
Also, thank you guys for staying through that. Okay, so, I mean, the first one, honestly, that I did this book right out of college that I still think is great. It's called The Artist's Way, and I totally still recommend it. I do this thing called the morning pages. I still do it. It's the way that I wake up in the morning. It's one of the best habits I've ever acquired. And so I think that that's like a nice thing to think about. And the other thing is like the kind of like the just do something, you know, the sense of like it doesn't like cut past your perfectionism. It doesn't have to be anything. Like I think of artwork like a snowball, where it's like you can't make a giant snowball unless you just mush together like a little bit of snow first. Maybe this is like not a great metaphor for today, but everyone has at least some idea how a snowball works. That like you just need something to start you. And like that it's so important to just do that, to just like let something come, you know? And then the other is like, you know, for me, one of the things that was, there were so many things that were so great about street art, but one of them actually was that it threw away like thousands of pieces of my art because I would put them out in the world and they would get washed away. And somehow, it's like that thing, have you heard that story about the Beatles playing at the strip clubs, the 10,000 hours thing? It's like this idea that you just need to do 1,000,000 times. And so like street art was very much like an enabler of that for me, but it was like, put it out, it's gone, put it out, it's gone, put it out, it's gone. It just got me into this sort of attitude that you just make it and let it go, you make it and let it go. Even though I was like saving copies, I'm not that pure. But like, you know what I mean? Like just like so much work happening and kind of not being precious about it. And then, let's see, maybe the last one, this is kind of weird, but see if this makes sense. Drawing, a lot of people think drawing is like from the hands or from the, and I'm like, drawing is like from the knees. Drawing is like use your body. Like, do you know, every great work of art you ever see, they're doing this, like they're not doing this. Even if it's a small piece, you're still like moving from your core in some way. And I just feel like you never hear people talk about that. So that's gonna that's on there. Any other thoughts or questions?
Anyone would like to have a question? I have a microphone here.
Great, thank you, Rosanna. Also, just like while
I guess it's actually, Paul talked about it a little bit with your drawing, and I really like that you talked about the whole body drawing. But I guess what I'm really interested in is that, you know, you have this, like, I think this a few minutes ago, this kind of like traditional, almost like etched to what is a real, like, massive technical strength on what you do, but then what you actually make at the end is like so adventurous and so far out. So I guess like what I'm interested in is something I guess I would want to, I'm also a teacher, so I would want to teach. I want to sort of know about is how do you get from that kind of first idea, that drawing, to the amazing stop-start animation or the floating, you know, what does your journey look like, I guess?
Do you mean like just quite literally from the drawing to the raft,
Yeah.
or like as a person who draws to being a person who would make a raft?
Sorry, I mean like kind of literally, like how do you kind of like build up that development?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just say the rafts. So one time I had this dream that I was like at this lake and there was like a dog and he was towing like this enormous raft behind him, and I was like, oh my god, I have to get to that. I need to see it. Like, come closer. I need to see it. I'm gonna get on this thing. And then I woke up and I was like, fuck. And I was literally like, now I have to build it because I didn't get to it. So like sometimes, you know, and it's not just that, like there were many kind of other ideas that led me. There was a moment when, you know, thinking about being like, you know, galleries, not everyone can come to the gallery or the museum, how do you bring it to people? There was all different sort of roads that led to that, like let's make a barge or a raft, including, you know, friends who had boats, all that stuff. So of course there's like the burning idea, and I do feel like that's kind of, I was gonna say it's core, but I'm gonna say it's just start. But like, so from there, I will get obsessive about studying. Like when I came to Thailand, I was like every floating market, every floating village, every floating school, every boat ride down the canal, just looking, researching the history of Viking ships, you know, skin canoes, like whatever, Tom Sawyer, all of it. And then I start with like, then I talk to everyone. And then eventually, for me, I'm very, like the balsa scale model is my best friend. Like that little thing you saw in the bathtub, but they fit with the structure as well. So like, you know, just kind of that like one piece at a time, just like building on, and you know, and for me, for the drawing to the sculptures, it's like a physical modeling. I actually, in this strange way, like because I'm a drawer, I actually cannot effectively imagine 3D space and just draw it. I see some people who can do it and I cannot. So what I do is I get out like balsa wood and hot glue and I just build the thing. And you can get like a shocking amount of information from like a little balsa wood model. So that's what I'm doing.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah. Oh yeah, this thing.
No, I know
Oh, you got it.
microphone, I think so.
Okay. Just speak up.
Yes, I don't know. No. But I need my head to...
Got it.
You talk about yin and art. What exactly you mean? What happens when art is free or other?
Yeah. Well, so the question is about healing in art, and I think that I'll give two answers. So the first time that I kind of understood this was actually in reference to sort of the collective action. So in Haiti, after the earthquake, I was really focused on the structures, on employing people. We raised a bunch of money to employ people because there was so much economic devastation. And I was really focused on building structures and in you know, shelter and this kind of thing. And at some point, a friend of mine was saying, you know, it may be that the relationship that you built is more important than the structures. And they went around and they actually interviewed people in town, and they were like, because they were thinking about, they had a project about art and healing, and they were like, why was this helpful? And one of the guys was like, look, after the earthquake, we didn't know what to fucking do. Like, everything was smashed, and like, because there was actually quite a lot of shock, there was this sense of like not knowing what the next move should be, not knowing how to like, how or when or in what way to do something. So he was like, the fact that we were all able to work together on the community center, just the simple thing of everyone coming together and doing the same thing and kind of making a decision, okay, it's gonna be this community center, okay, we're working together. Just that like ability to like feel that you're doing something productive for your community and that you're doing it with others, that it kind of just like gave him this sense of efficacy and a focus that he said felt really stabilizing for him. And that was like pretty awakening for me. I was like, I think this is real. Like this is, he's really onto something that's kind of happens in a lot of situations. That if we can, if we can work together in times of chaos, we can sort of rebuild a sense of that we can affect things, and that's so important. And then for me, these kinds of things like working on, these images. It's like when you're little, and something happens and you don't know how to process it. And in fact, this particular memory was lost for a while for me, and then it came back when I was a teenager, and then I talked to my family about it, etc. But like, the psyche is such a weirdo, and like when things are lost in the psyche and you're alone with them, it's like this sense that like just you don't. I don't know. There's this humans need other humans, and there's this sense of disconnection and isolation and powerlessness. But if you can sort of take the demon out and put it on the page, and now you're looking at it, you're like eye to eye. You're like, hey buddy, what's up? And there's just that little bit of efficacy and power of being like, now you're 3 inches tall and made out of clay, and I'm going to move you around, and there's just like a little bit of like getting friendly with the contents of your own nightmares that I just feel it just like externalizes things. It gives you a little sense of like agency and power that you need to feel empowered when you're feeling out of control. And that's just one way. I mean, I think there's hundreds of ways that it works for people, but that's just what popped to my mind when you asked that.
In terms of your work, in terms of the London different, like printmaking, it's obviously a lot more prominent, like print a lot more prominent than street art. But now it seems like it's just the aesthetic and land movement that you maintain. Do you still do the printmaking, or is it just about the art?
Yeah, it's pretty much just the mart. So like you'll see on this puppet, well, I mean, I'm doing a little bit of combination, and I do a little bit of printmaking now and then, but I mainly just kind of like the feeling of because those lines are just my drawing lines. So I don't actually have many sketches in here, but those lines are just my drawing lines, and then I transferred them into carving lines. So as I started to work on these projects, I sort of liked the idea or the feeling of kind of keeping those same lines, in the puppets, in the humans, in the sort of figures, because for me it kind of lends like an unreality to it that it sort of still feels like a drawing. And I still work with printmaking generally, but the big prints, they're so time consuming that I was like, if I'm gonna allow myself to evolve creatively, it was like, it's like you're stacking plates, and you're just like, I can keep stacking plates forever, and then you realize that you're mortal and you can't. I was like, okay, this really big one has to come off the bottom, and it was street art and printmaking, and it's hard because that was like my life for almost 20 years, but I had to actually retire from it, so that I could let this other thing evolve, which is writing these stories, like I'm working on kind of a couple of short films and and I have some full-length scripts, and just things that were sort of demanding that I like lay down my old processes in order to make room for them. What? At least a month. But I mean, then I could, like, a month to carve a print, but then I could, make the print and then paste it out. So, like, that would take me a day or so. Something like that. Cool. Anyone else have thoughts or questions?
I will come to the microphone.
Musical chairs. Are you going to say that?
I was going to ask you about from the organizational side. I mean, a lot of people don't end up doing art in their life, right? But I think most people see homeless people, see people in trouble around them every day, and feel they want to help, but it's like there's sort of friction between them actually doing action. And obviously in your life, what you've told us in your story so far, you've ignored those rules multiple times with your friends, and so just from that sort of point of view, that Joe Sullivan has a job every day but actually wants to get involved. Obviously there's organizations that are there, but in what other ways could we get over that friction? A lot of people want help.
Yeah. You know, I think that's such a beautiful question, really, because it's like, I think we all feel this sense of pain, right? And like, there's so many things happening in the world. We obviously can't help everything, but like, it makes so much sense that we should be able to lend like part of ourselves to like one thing that we care a little bit about. And I mean, personally, I love working with organizations, and the reason it's important for me, so even like in Haiti, we partnered with the Mango Growers Association. So they were just like a farmers co-op, but it was really important for us to be working with somebody who's already self-organizing, because it was important for us that like we kind of knew that there was a community that already kind of was self-advocating, that they knew what they needed, and that when we left, it wasn't like there was going to be some vacuum. It was like the mango growers were already there. We were just sort of their partner. And that has been really important to me over and over again. So like in Philly, that storefront space that I showed, that was already there. I just did some work in that space. And again, that matters because people need to know that that space is going to be there day after day. So I actually do think that like finding great organizations and figuring out how to plug in there is like a great thing. But the question sometimes is just like, what's a great organization? You know, like I've done like volunteering for like cooking for a soup kitchen, and even though you're like happy about that, I was like, you know what, this is not for me. It's like I feel that this is good, but like being back here like opening these cans isn't actually my best. I'm gonna lend myself better in a different way. And so like, you know, for me it was like, it's actually so funny. So I feel like this is also kind of a naive story. So like you guys know the Zapatistas in Mexico. So like at one point, you know, in my 20s, and I'm like, I'm gonna go like help the Zapatistas. So kind of silly now. But you know, we knew we were learning from folks, but I had this like idea that I was gonna like dig a trench, or I don't know what I thought I was gonna do. And I get to, and there were other friends, and I'm like, you need some help. And the guy was like, yeah, paint a mural. And I was like, oh, but I wanted to. And he was like, you're good at painting a mural. Like, this is the community leadership. He's like, just do what you're good at. Like, why are you trying to not do what you're good at? And so, I don't know. I do think, like, sometimes it's simpler than we think it is, and often it really is just about, like, connecting with who you like and trust, who's already kind of doing that work, and just being like, how can I support your work? Or, like, how is this weird little, like, skill that I have that, like, you don't realize that nobody's doing the IT or nobody's doing the, like, whatever. Who knows, but I don't know. I mean, it's not a very like unique answer, but I told my kids. Thank you. Okay, good. Thank you guys so much for coming. This has been really sweet.